We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome to Conspiracy Corner Podcast, everyone. This is Abe, your host. It is 5:55 a.m., Friday, March 11th, 2022. Just got home from work. It was a pretty chill day. A little stressed out at the beginning just because I didn't think everything would get done, but the new girl was a little bit faster today. I think she'll get the hang of it, knock on wood, eventually. So that'll be cool. Give me a little bit of help. But yeah, as far as updates, supposed to get some snow here in Kentucky tomorrow. 3 inches, which I'm not looking forward to. At least I got brand new tires on the Pontiac, though. A set of 4 brand new tires, so that's good. I needed that this winter, especially after, if you listen to a previous episode, I can't remember which episode it was, but car ended up breaking down, ended up being stuck out, abandoned basically, waiting for a ride in the snow for about an hour or 2 hours. It's horrible. But yeah, let's get on with the show. Today we are covering abandoned places. Now, the reason I wanted to cover this is just because I do a lot of ghost hunting, me and my wife. And the thing about ghost hunting is like most of the time, to be quite frank and to be honest, you're not going to find much paranormal stuff. You might catch an orb or EVP every now and then, but for the most part, it's urban exploration. So, unless it's kind of like when you go squatch, like looking for Sasquatch. If you don't like hiking or camping, you're not going to enjoy looking for Sasquatch, because most likely you're not going to find Sasquatch. So hopefully you enjoy hiking and camping. Same thing with ghost hunting. You go to a lot of abandoned places and stuff and go ghost hunting. Most likely you're not going to catch anything, or not catch much. So hopefully you enjoy urban exploration. So honestly, this is kind of a urban exploration episode. Just talking about different abandoned places around the world that I find interesting. But yeah, we'll get on with the show. No place haunting, creepy, and beautiful. No place stirs the soul more than that which once was, and now is no more. Take an eerie journey back in time to those sad and lonely destinations that would disappear into history if not for the amazing stories they tell. Visit forsaken cities swallowed by Mother Nature, decrepit hospitals and insane asylums, where the wind carries the cries of long-dead patients. Amusement parks and resorts where the laughter has died, solitary lighthouses whose beacons have gone dark, ghost towns, buried cities, broken down schools, boneyards, rusting jails, and the houses of worship deserted by their own gods. In these parallel worlds, the mesmerizing melts with the horrifying, the beautiful with the grotesque, all unnervingly quiet as the past struggles to be heard. Now this is Namur, Belgium, Chateau Miranda. A fairy tale castle in Belgium suffers an unhappy ending. It was a castle fit for a Disney princess, a neo-Gothic marvel with 100 rooms, ornate ceilings, grand staircases, candelabras, and a 150-foot clock tower, built over more than 30 years, starting in 1866, for a wealthy family who had lost their previous home during the French Revolution. Chateau Miranda in Namur, Belgium, welcomed aristocrats who lounged in the plush rooms and strolled the Victorian gardens for generations. Then the magic spell was broken, as fighting erupted around the grounds during World War II. Invading Nazis eventually occupied the castle and used it as barracks. After the war, the Belgian government converted it to an orphanage and vacation camp for 200 kids, giving the estate its new name, Chateau De Carnelle. By the early 1990s, the orphanage and camp were shut down, and the castle was abandoned, falling prey to vandals and the elements. Yeah, it's another thing you got to look out for when you're like doing urban exploration is like homeless people or vandals or druggies or stuff like that. Falling prey to vandals and elements, urban explorers and ghost hunters roamed Chateau Miranda, a decrepit shell of its former grandeur. The floors littered with debris, paint peeling from the walls, dolls left by the orphans lay covered in dust. Hollywood used it as the location for Castle Lecter in the TV show Hannibal. With preservationists seeking to restore the castle, local officials sought to take over the grounds, but the rich count, whose family owned the property, balked at the cost and the ordeal. Quote, "People are saying that the count wants his descendants to finally have some peace," Le Figaro reported. Clearly, the affluence provoked by the majesty of the site just didn't do it for him, quote unquote. As a relatively young castle, it didn't enjoy the same historic designation of other centuries-old Belgian edifices, and it is always the question of whether it would attract enough visitors to justify the expense of renovation and operation. After a fire destroyed large portions of the building, the family applied for a permit to tear it down, and demolition began. By October 2017, Chateau Miranda was no more. So that's one place you can't go, but I will have pictures if you're watching on YouTube of each of these abandoned places. If you're not watching on YouTube and you prefer to listen on audio only, you can find us on Google Podcasts, Radio Public, Spotify, and Anchor, and Breaker. Some people prefer audio only because it saves their phone battery. But some episodes it's better to watch on YouTube, and you can find us at Conspiracy Corner Podcast, and the profile picture is a bunny rabbit dressed as a samurai. So, Lapalice, Poland. Lapalice Castle, an artist's ambitious project, sits unfinished in a small Polish village. It was supposed to be a modest residence, but sculptor Piotr Kazimierzak had bigger ideas. What began in 1979 as a single-family house with a small studio in a tiny Polish village grew into a palace that came to be called Lapalice Castle, with 52 rooms, a swimming pool, and a dozen turrets, one for each of Jesus' 12 apostles. It would have kept growing had Kazimierzak not run out of money and the local authorities not run out of patience at the estates spilled onto the land, for which did not have permits. Construction stopped in 1991, with the castle now an unfinished shell, attracting vandals, even as the artist clings to hope his grand vision may one day be realized. Guys, by the way, you might hear my cat every now and then. He's driving me nuts. Saint Martin du Tetre, France. Chateau De Carnelle. A French castle that played its part in war and battling diseases is now a decrepit shell. Built for André Philippe Alfred Rainier, the third Duke of Massa. I wonder if he's related to that Rainier, the one that did the whole Nexium cult. That might be a good deep dive, see if they're related or not. Between 1876 and 1890, the Renaissance revival marvel sits on the edge of France's Carnelle Forest, about 30 miles north of Paris, on land once given to monks by Charles V, a near duplicate of the Chateau de Maisons, Lafite, and Yvelines. To the southwest, the castle, also known as Chateau de Franconville, boasts 18 bedrooms and servants' quarters in the attic. The estate includes parkland with more than 100 kinds of trees, a chapel, greenhouses, a theater, and ornate columned rotundas. In the lavish setting, the Duke threw grand parties and treated his guests to the finest in accommodations. But the outbreak of World War I saw this playground for the elite converted into a military hospital, and it never returned to its original glamorous purpose. After the war, the Duke donated the estate to the city of Paris. Starting in 1930, it was used as a sanatorium, primarily for tuberculosis patients. With the then incurable disease plaguing the country, the hospital was expanded over the years to 500 beds and surgical wards. As antibiotics were developed, the numbers of patients needing hospitalization decreased. And in the 1960s, the sanitarium was downsized into a dietary facility with only 60 beds. It was used until the 1990s when it was abandoned. The windows were bricked over and painted to look real, and then it was left to decay, weeds invading the once impeccably manicured gardens. A pair of lion statues at the front steps are now stained and pockmarked, sad sentinels guarding the hollowed-out castle. Although a high-tech security system was installed, urban explorers discovered ways into the castle, where they discovered crumbling, molding, warped floorboards, and peeling paint on the walls. Declared a historic monument in 1987, locals hope it can be renovated. Part of the estate was sold in 2014 to a Russian group with plans to turn it into a luxurious hotel and spa, but it was put back on the market in 2019. The Murder Mansion. And this is Samut Saikon, Thailand. A family's senseless slaughter turns a Thai home into a crime time capsule. Once a showcase multi-story home with a dramatic skylight, this mansion in Bangkok suburb of Samut Saikon sits eerily deserted, a magnet for snakes, lizards, drug addicts, and vandals. Somebody scrawled haunting messages in red paint on a peeling wall, and indeed, reminders of the horrors that visited this house cannot be ignored. According to local lore, a family of 3 was murdered in the mansion sometime after they moved there in the 1970s. Photographer Dax Ward, who documented the chilling residence, says his research showed that the Chinese Thai victims, a mother, father, and child, were recent arrivals whose thriving business drew the attention of robbers, who broke into the house one night. Quote, "The burglary seems to have got out of hand, and the criminals murdered the entire family and took whatever cash and valuables they could," Ward said in 2019. "They got away, and as far as anyone knows, they've never been caught." The cursed house remains frozen in time, with the kitchen plates, furniture, a bed, lamps, and shoes left in place, Ward said that his visit was certainly eerie as he walked through the dilapidated home, which has now been damaged by fires. There was an old rusty knife lying on the upper floor, which I found to be a bit creepy, he added. It is awful to imagine the horrific crime that was committed there. And now we get into abandoned ghost towns. Pripyat, and this is in Ukraine. The Chernobyl disaster turned the bustling city into a post-apocalyptic time capsule. Once Pripyat pulsed with life, movie theaters and stores, factories, a hospital, even an amusement park. Then on April 26, 1986, during a routine test, Reactor 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear station, 2 miles away, exploded and caught fire. 2 workers were killed in the blast, and 28 firemen and emergency cleanup workers died in the next 3 months after being exposed to the spewing radioactive material. Evacuations were ordered for the entire town of Pripyat. Population 49,360. People scrambled to scoop up whatever the belongings they could and carry and fled, leaving behind a haunting time capsule. Soviet propaganda posters hang from peeling walls. Children's school books remain cracked open on dusty desks. Yellow gondolas dangle empty on a Ferris wheel, and the bumper cars sit forever idle. Old gas masks lie in piles next to yellowing instruction manuals. The concrete apartment buildings stand eerily silent. The windows broken, the plazas deserted and overgrown with weeds and trees. All of the clocks are stopped at exactly 11:55 a.m. when the electricity was cut off. For decades, Pripyat served as a terrible symbol of the horrors the Chernobyl disaster wrought in the form of untold thousands of deaths from radiation-related cancers. The city now is a symbol of a difficult sort, showing what world may look like after humans are gone. Carved out of a forest and wetlands in the early 1970s, Pripyat and the surrounding areas have in some ways yielded back to nature. While the ecosystem still shows the scars of the radiation in the worst hit areas, elsewhere foxes, wolves, raccoons, and dogs and rats scamper. Bison, once nearly extinct, now roam again, and brown bears have reformed their ancient colonies. The ecological phenomenon, combined with the macabre spectacle of the abandoned city and its interest from the HBO series Chernobyl, has turned Pripyat into a tourist draw, with people now allowed to visit the area as radiation reaches safer levels. The demand for access is so high that the problem for local officials is not a lack of people, but too many. California, USA, Bodie. The Wild West mining town remains in arrested decay in the California desert. Once a dusty, remote mining camp, Bodie blossomed into a California boomtown, which, with the discovery of rich gold-bearing ore in 1876, as the population exploded from a handful of prospectors to 7,000 miners, merchants, railroad workers, drifters, gamblers, stagecoach robbers, and gunslingers, as many as 65 saloons lined Main Street. Opium dens soon popped up in bustling Chinatown, and prostitutes plied their trade in the red light district at the north end of town. The many barroom fights and shootouts brought steady business to the mortuary, the town's only brick building. The other 2,000 structures were made of wood and supplied enough corpses for 2 cemeteries, an official city cemetery and a boot hill for those the town fathers considered less desirable. Once prosperous enough to support its own newspapers, as Wells Fargo Bank, a telegraph office, a fire department, Bodie started to go to bust after a few years. After extracting millions of dollars from the ground, the gold began to run out, and miners fled for more promising stakes in Arizona, Montana, and Utah. By 1910, Bodie was nearly deserted and remained that way until it became a National Historic Landmark District in 1961. Now, the 110 remaining structures stand in a state of arrested decay as one of the world's best preserved Wild West ghost towns. Now, this is in Cyprus. It's called Varosha and Nicosia. Celebrities once played at these now bombed out sites on this Mediterranean island. When the Turkish army invaded the island of Cyprus in 1974, tens of thousands of residents fled Varosha, the popular resort section of the city of Famagusta. With little more than the clothes on their backs, overnight the swinging tourist destination where Elizabeth Taylor vacationed at the swank Argo Hotel overlooking Fig Tree Bay, and Brigitte Bardot and Raquel Welch strolled the fashionable boutiques along Leonidas Street, became a ghost town. Today the area stands as a grim symbol of divided rule. The resort suffered major bombing damage before it was surrounded by a barbed wire fence and barred entry to everyone except occupying Turkish soldiers and United Nations personnel for more than 4 decades. This resulted in the area remaining almost exactly as it was, down to the once new cars parked in dealer showrooms. The same fate awaited Nicosia International Airport, west of the Pripyat capital. Nicosia, used as a military airfield since the 1930s during the British colonial era, the airport expanded to include a modern terminal for commercial flights capable of handling 800 passengers a day and runways built for jumbo jets. Turkish forces bombed the airport and its hangars and waiting rooms. A lone Cyprus Airways Trident Sun jet passenger plane sits sadly on the tarmac, awaiting takeoff clearance that will never come. The airport now serves as the headquarters of the UN peacekeeper force, and for intermittent talks to find a solution to the political impasse, as Turkish and Greek Cypriot officials bicker over the fate of Varosha's forbidden zone. Its buildings continue to crumble. In 1984, UN Security Council resolution states the city can only be resettled by its original residents, and activists hope to restore Varosha to its former glory. But even if people do return to the resort, they'll be faced with decades of decay. People have romantic images of this place, so they remember it exactly as they left it in 1974. Architect and activist Surin Bogak told Al Jazeera. Some people don't even know the giant trees have grown through their houses and demolished everything, and there is not much to save. This is in Namibia. Kolmanskop mining town. Sandstorms have consumed the former diamond mining area in the Namib Desert. In 1908, the Namibian railroad worker, clearing sand off the rails, spotted strange shimmering stones. He showed them to his supervisor, who had them inspected. The stones were diamonds. The discovery transformed these sand dunes in West Africa's Namib Desert into the world's richest diamond mines, producing up to 1 million carats a year by 1912. The little German colony of Kolmanskop in southern Namibia blossomed into a diamond of its own, a surreal speck of luxury in the desert. Nourished by fresh water, brought by rail, and entertained by visiting European opera troupes, German authorities sealed off the area into Pripyat, or restricted zone, and local tribespeople were displaced off their own land or left no choice but to work as laborers. When the diamonds ran out in the 1930s, miners moved on to more promising deposits, and by 1956, Kolmanskop was abandoned. As the desert reclaimed the land, mountains of sand invaded empty buildings. Shangshan Island, China. Houtouwan Village, a remote fishing settlement on a Chinese island, has been overtaken by vegetation. When the inhabitants of China's remote Shangshan Island, east of Shanghai, started leaving in the early 1990s for better schools and more reliable food sources, vegetation overtook the cliffside houses as the green blanket enveloped Houtouwan's fishing village, where 3,000 people once lived. It created dramatic tableau irresistible to photographers. When pictures went viral in 2015, people started flocking to the town, creating a temporary crisis. Quote, "We urge visitors to preserve its tranquility for now," a local official pleaded. The pressure has been relieved by viewing platforms. A peek inside some of the homes revealed decaying household items, including bed frames and kitchen utensils. By 2018, about a dozen people remained in the village, selling water to tourists. It's the only thing available for sale on the island. Montserrat, Plymouth, the capital city of a Caribbean island, has been partially consumed by an active volcano. For centuries, the Soufriere Hills volcano mostly sat dormant. Then on July 18, 1995, the volcano stirred to life, belching ash and hot gas that blanketed the southern end of the Caribbean island of Montserrat, where the capital city of Plymouth was located. As more volcanic matter rained down, residents were evacuated in December 1995 as a precaution. They were allowed to return months later, but a massive eruption in 1997 that killed 19 people forced Plymouth's residents to flee again, many of them never to return to their island home. The government sealed off the southern part of the island as an exclusion zone, and the local economy, already hobbled by the devastation from the Hurricane Hugo in 1989, was decimated. More than half the island's original population of 13,000 is now gone, most of the UK. The island is a British territory, and Plymouth sits stark and forbidding, encased in a thick concrete-like mixture of lava, ash, and rock, as the world's only capital ghost town. In Belgium is the Chatillon Car Graveyard. 100-plus pileup was discovered deep in the European woods. How did the vehicles get there? It's a traffic jam that lasted for decades deep in Belgium forest. More than 100 vintage American automobiles were lined up and left to rust in a haunting car graveyard, whose history is as tangled as the roots invading the old chassis. Some of the cars in this surreal site outside the small village of Chatillon were said to have been abandoned as far back as World War II. According to local or U.S. soldiers ditched their private vehicles in remote locations to hide them from invading Nazis. At war's end, the Americans left many of the cars behind, rather than pay for the high cost of shipping them home. That may account for some of the cars, but not all. Since many of them were built after the war, the later models were likely to come from Canadian employees of NATO living in Belgium and France after the war. They are believed to have been brought from a local garage specializing in selling and repairing American models, then had to leave them behind when they left France in the 1960s during the country's dispute with NATO. The car graveyard was actually located on the land behind the garage. Either way, the cars sat under the trees for years as locals stripped them. Logos were particularly popular, and nature took its toll on what remained. Discovered by urban adventurers, the site became a popular destination due to the dramatic photos posted on the internet. The area drew unwanted curiosity seekers for years. By 2009, locals, worried about the environmental damage from the cars, had cleaned up the area. Uyuni, Bolivia, the Great Train Graveyard. Rusting relics of trade and transportation sit in a surreal cemetery in Bolivia. The Bolivian city of Uyuni draws tens of thousands of tourists each year as the gateway to the world's largest salt flats, a surreal, barren expanse where the only structure is a hotel made entirely of salt. But just outside of town is another curious attraction, the Great Train Graveyard of Cementerio de Trenes. Is the final resting place for the early 20th century locomotives and rail cars. Most of the more than 100 train cars were imported from Britain to link this trading post on to the Andean plain with other South American cities. The decline of the mining industry and disputes with neighboring countries doomed those dreams, and by the 1940s the trains were abandoned. There are no guards at Cementerio de Trenes, so tourists climb up on top of the engines corroded by salty winds and take pictures inside the train cars, with one hall even converted into a swing. Quote, most other countries would have removed the old trains, cordoned them off, and perhaps made a museum out of them, blogger Mike Powell wrote. The fact that they've been abandoned here to be stripped by locals and climbed upon by monkey-like foreigners might not be the most constructive or safest idea, but it's pretty awesome. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you guys enjoyed. Like I said, I know it was a little weird episode. It's different than what I normally cover, but I don't know. I've been trying to do different subjects here and there. Like I did a Wild West series. I did a survival story series on people who survived crazy stuff like being swallowed by a whale or falling off a mountain. And I don't know. This was just an episode that I wanted to do for a while. Just a simple, calm episode on abandoned places because I like urban exploration. It's one of my interests. For anyone who's kept up with the channel all these years. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Please like, share, and subscribe, and rate us wherever you can. Give us 5 stars, and have a good day.
We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.